Now I'd like to tell you one last story about my best friend, a guy who had lots of crazy ideas and taught me an important lesson. My 30-year friendship with Steve Jobs was made up of 1,000 walks. If there was something he wanted to talk about, and there always was, we'd go for a walk. We'd climb to the top of Windy Hill, hike around Castle Rock or through the sands on the beach at Kona Village. Over the years, one particular walk stands out. We had a lot to talk about that day, so we jumped in the car, put the top down, and headed out to Castle Rock State Park in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It was over 20 years ago, back in mid-1995. Steve was finishing up Toy Story at Pixar and running Next, the computer company he founded after he left Apple. Apple was in severe distress. It had gone steadily downhill during the 10 years of Steve's absence. The problems were now so serious, people were wondering if Apple would survive. It was all too painful to watch and stand by and do nothing. So the purpose of that particular hike through the Santa Cruz Mountains on that particular day was to discuss taking over Apple Computer. My idea was simple: buy Apple and immediately make Steve CEO. Apple wasn't worth much back then, about $5 billion. We both had really good credit. And I had already arranged to borrow all the money. All Steve had to do was say yes. Steve proposed a somewhat more circuitous approach. First, persuade Apple to buy Next Computer. Then Steve would join the Apple board, and over time, the board would recognize that Steve was the right guy to lead the company. I said, okay, that might work. But Steve, if we don't buy Apple, how are we going to make any money? Suddenly, Steve stopped walking and turned toward me. We were facing each other when he put his left hand on my right shoulder and his right hand on my left shoulder. Staring unblinkingly into my eyes, Steve said, "Larry, this is why it's so important that I'm your friend. You don't need any more money." I said, "Yeah, I know. Then I said, "But we don't have to keep it. We could give it all away." I was whining. Steve just shook his head and said, "I'm not doing this for the money. I don't want to get paid. If I do this, I need to do this standing on the moral high ground." "The moral high ground?" I said. "Well, that just might be the most expensive real estate on earth." But I knew I had lost the argument. Steve had made up his mind, right there and then, at Castle Rock in the summer of 1995, to save Apple his way. At the end of the hike, right before we got back into the car, I said, "Steve, you created Apple, it's your company, and it's your call. I'll do whatever you want me to do." I went on the Apple board, and then I watched Steve build the most valuable company on earth. The lesson here is very clear to me. Steve was right. After a certain point, it can't be about the money. After a certain point, you can't spend it, no matter how hard you try. I know, I've tried hard. But it's impossible. In the end, the only practical option is to give nearly all of it away. So why did Steve go back to Apple? Why did he devote so much of what remained of his life to his job? Why do I? I believe the answer is that deep inside of all of us, There's a primal desire to do something important with our lives.